The alien girl's blue blood sprayed across the human soldier's face as he ripped her mangled body from the rubble and held her close. The forbidden love he felt for this alien girl welling up inside him, while the cries of his human comrades being slaughtered by her evil alien race echoed in the distance. Gamma Orionis, once a peaceful human colony, now a war-ravaged hellscape strewn with the corpses of humans and Jem'Hadar alike. The ruthless Jem'Hadar, armed with advanced weaponry and a thirst for human blood, had all but crushed the primitively equipped human resistance. The survival of the entire human colony hung by a thread. Private Charles Brown, a lowly human grunt, found himself cut off from his unit, alone and surrounded, as Jem'Hadar forces closed in. Plasma bolts crackled by his head as he desperately sought cover in the twisted ruins of a demolished HAB complex. As all seemed lost, a faint whimper caught his ear, emanating from beneath a collapsed wall. Clawing through the rubble, Charles discovered a gravely wounded Jem'Hadar girl, her once proud alien features marred by shrapnel and soot. Her life hung by a thread, much like the fate of Charles's fellow humans. In that moment, Charles saw past the alien, the hated enemy, and saw suffering being in need of help. He faced an impossible choice. To save this alien girl would be to betray his species, his comrades still dying under Jem'Hadar guns. She was one of the monsters slaughtering his brothers and sisters. Yet, to leave her to die in the rubble, slowly and painfully, could he still call himself human? Charles knew what he had to do. The human soldier scooped the broken alien body into his arms and ran. He would find a way to save this girl, and maybe to save them all. His actions in the next hours would change the course of the war and the fate of both their species forever. Charles' heart pounded in his chest as he crept through the desolate streets, the weight of Xanth's limp body heavy in his arms. The once bustling city lay in ruins, the eerie silence broken only by the distant sounds of warfare and the crunching of debris beneath his boots. As he turned a corner, a glimmer of hope caught his eye. A medical facility, its walls still standing amidst the destruction. Charles hurried towards the building, his mind racing with the possibility of finding the supplies he needed to save Xanth's life. Kicking open the door, Charles staggered into the darkened interior, quickly scanning the room for any signs of life. The place had been ransacked, shelves overturned and equipment smashed, but there was no sign of its previous inhabitants. He gently laid Xanth on a dusty exam table, before frantically rummaging through the remaining drawers and cabinets for anything he could use. With a sigh of relief, Charles gathered a handful of basic medical supplies, some bandages, a suture kit, and a few vials of antiseptic. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he began to clean and dress Xanth's wounds, her eyes fluttered open, wide with fear and confusion. What are you doing?" she croaked, her voice weak and tinged with pain. Charles paused his work, meeting her gaze with a reassuring smile. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here to help you. You're safe now." Xanth struggled to sit up, her face twisted with suspicion. "But you're human. Why would you help me?" As he worked, Charles could feel Xanth's eyes on him, watching his every move. Gradually, her tension seemed to ease, replaced by a growing sense of trust and gratitude. In the stillness of the abandoned facility, a fragile bond began to form between the two unlikely allies. Hours passed as they huddled in the shadows, sharing whispered stories of their pasts and their hopes for a future beyond the war. For a moment, the horrors of the outside world seemed to fade away, replaced by a glimmer of understanding and shared humanity. But their respite was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Charles's blood ran cold as he recognized the guttural voices of Jem'Hadar soldiers barking orders as they searched the building. Xanth's eyes widened with terror as she grasped Charles's arm. "It's my father," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's come for me. If he finds us—" Charles' mind raced as he scanned the room for an escape route. They were trapped, with nowhere to run and no way to fight. As the footsteps grew closer, he knew they had only one chance at survival. They had to hide and pray that the soldiers would move on without discovering them. Pulling Xanth close, Charles ducked into a nearby supply closet, holding his breath as the door clicked shut behind them. In the suffocating darkness, they clung to each other, hearts pounding as the footsteps approached their hiding place. As the heavy footsteps drew closer, Charles's heart raced with adrenaline. He gripped Xanth's hand tightly, feeling her pulse quicken with fear. Suddenly, a distant explosion rocked the building, shaking dust from the ceiling. The footsteps paused, then retreated as the Jem'Hadar soldiers barked orders to investigate the disturbance. Seizing their chance, Charles and Xanth slipped out of the closet and crept through the shadows of the medical facility. They moved as silently as ghosts, holding their breath at every creak and rustle. Finally, they reached a shattered window and climbed out into the war-torn streets. The once proud city had been reduced to a labyrinth of rubble and twisted metal. Charles took the lead, navigating the treacherous terrain with the instincts of a seasoned soldier. Xanth followed close behind, her keen senses alert for any sign of pursuit. They darted from cover to cover, hiding in the shadows of collapsed buildings and overturned vehicles. Charles's combat experience proved invaluable as he anticipated the Jem'Hadar's search patterns, guiding them away from the enemy's path. Xanth's knowledge of her people's technology also came into play. She spotted a Jem'Hadar drone hovering overhead and quickly pulled Charles into a narrow alley, just as the drone's scanners swept over their previous location. As they huddled in the darkness, waiting for the drone to pass, Xanth whispered her dreams of a future without war. She spoke of a place where humans and Jem'Hadar could coexist peacefully, where children could grow up without fear of death and destruction. Charles listened intently, his own heart yearning for the same. He shared stories of his life before the war, of his family and friends, now lost to the conflict. In those moments of shared vulnerability, their bond grew stronger, forged by the fires of adversity. But their respite was short-lived. As they emerged from the alley, they found themselves face to face with a dead end. The collapsed remains of a once great skyscraper loomed before them, blocking their path. From behind, the sound of the Jem'Hadar patrol grew louder. They were closing in, their weapons at the ready. Charles and Xanth backed up against the wall, their eyes searching desperately for a way out. Suddenly a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. It was Xanth's father, his tone cold and authoritative. "Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick," he demanded. "Resist, and you will suffer greatly before you die." Charles knew they were trapped. In a last-ditch effort to save Xanth, he prepared to step out and draw the patrol's fire, hoping to buy her time to escape. But Xanth grabbed his arm, her eyes fierce with determination. "No," she hissed. "We stay together, we fight together, we die together if we must, but I will not leave you." Charles and Xanth dug frantically at the debris, their fingers bleeding from the jagged edges of broken concrete and twisted rebar. They could hear the soldiers' harsh breathing now, smell the acrid stench of their plasma weapons charging up. Just as all hope seemed lost, Xanth's hand broke through the wall of rubble, a small opening just large enough for them to squeeze through. Without hesitation, they plunged into the darkness, the angry shouts of the Jem'Hadar fading behind them. But their escape was far from certain. The narrow tunnel they found themselves in was pitch black and filled with jagged debris. They could hear the ominous creaking of unstable supports, the distant drip of water echoing off the walls. Every step was a gamble, every breath a risk. They clung to each other in the darkness, their hearts pounding as one. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, a nightmarish gauntlet of hidden dangers and lurking threats. As the Jem'Hadar's guttural shouts echoed through the crumbling ruins, Charles' eyes darted frantically, searching for an escape. Suddenly his gaze fell upon a hidden access panel, barely visible beneath the debris. With a surge of desperate strength, he pried it open, revealing a dark, cramped maintenance tunnel. "Xanth, in here," he hissed, helping her into the opening. They descended into the murky depths, sealing the panel behind them with a dull clang. The tunnel stretched out before them, a nightmarish labyrinth of twisting passages and stagnant, knee-deep water. The only illumination came from bioluminescent fungi clinging to the damp walls, casting an eerie green glow. The air was thick and heavy, laden with the stench of decay and despair. Each step was a struggle, the water dragging at their legs like icy hands. As they slogged through the oppressive darkness, the weight of their situation bore down upon them. The constant threat of discovery, the suffocating closeness of the tunnel walls, the knowledge that their pursuers could be just behind them, it all combined into a suffocating miasma of fear and tension. And, rounding a corner, they came upon a grim tableau. The scattered remains of long-dead soldiers, human and Jem'Hadar alike, littered the tunnel floor. Tattered uniforms and bleached bones, picked clean by the rats and the passage of time. A silent testament to the war's cruel toll. Xanth shuddered, turning away from the macabre sight. But Charles urged her forward, his voice low and urgent. "We can't stop. They're still coming." As if on cue, a distant echo reached their ears. The splash of footsteps, the harsh bark of Jem'Hadar voices. Their pursuers had found the tunnel. Charles and Xanth exchanged a look of pure terror. Then as one they broke into a stumbling run, splashing through the fetid water. The tunnel began to slope upwards, and ahead they could see a faint glimmer of light. An exit, a chance. But as they drew closer, their hopes turned to ashes. The light was coming from a grate, and covering that grate was a tangled mass of razor-sharp alien plant life. Serrated leaves and barbed vines, glistening with a viscous sap. It blocked their path like a living wall of knives. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Before them, the impassable barrier. Trapped between two deadly fates, Charles and Xanth faced an impossible choice: risk the shredding embrace of the alien growth, or turn and fight, and likely die under the Jem'Hadar's ruthless onslaught. Charles gritted his teeth as he sawed at the tangled mass of razor-sharp foliage, blocking their path. The alien plant's serrated leaves sliced into his hands, his blood mingling with the viscous sap that oozed from the severed stems. But he pressed on, ignoring the searing pain, knowing their lives depended on it. Beside him, Xanth labored to assemble a makeshift torch, her nimble fingers repurposing the shattered remnants of a light fixture. The flickering glow cast eerie shadows on the tunnel walls, but it was a welcome relief from the oppressive darkness. As she worked, Xanth fought against the weakness that threatened to overwhelm her, her injuries taking their toll. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, the splashing footsteps and harsh voices of the Jem'Hadar soldiers echoing through the tunnel. Charles redoubled his efforts, his knife blade flashing as he hacked at the unyielding barrier. Xanth held the torch aloft, the light dancing over the glistening leaves, revealing the smallest of gaps in the otherwise impenetrable wall. "There!" Xanth hissed, pointing to the opening. Charles nodded, focusing his attack on the weak point. The leaves resisted, their edges leaving bloody furrows on his forearms, but he refused to yield. With a final, desperate slash, the last of the vines parted, revealing a small jagged hole just large enough to crawl through. At that moment, a violent tremor rocked the tunnel. The walls buckled and cracked, showering them with debris. From behind, a torrent of water burst forth from a ruptured pipe, the sudden deluge sweeping through the passage like a raging river. Charles and Xanth clung to each other as the water surged around them, threatening to rip them apart. The Jem'Hadar soldiers, caught in the flood, shouted in panic as they were swept away, their weapons useless against the unrelenting current. Charles seized the opportunity, pushing Xanth towards the opening. "Go now!" Together they clawed their way through the razor-sharp edges of the grate, the jagged metal tearing at their clothes and skin. Behind them, the tunnel collapsed with a deafening roar, the tons of rubble and debris sealing off the passage forever. They tumbled out into the open air, gasping and choking, their lungs burning with each breath. As the adrenaline of their escape ebbed, the toll of their ordeal became apparent. Their bodies were battered and bleeding, their clothes torn and soaked through. But they were alive. As their eyes adjusted to the muted light, they found themselves in a desolate, mist-shrouded swamp. Twisted trees loomed out of the fog, their branches draped with ghostly tendrils of moss. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the fetid water lapping at their feet. Charles and Xanth exchanged a weary glance, the realization sinking in. They had escaped the horrors of the city, but now they faced a new set of challenges in this alien and potentially hostile wilderness. With no supplies, no weapons, and no idea what dangers lurked in the murky depths, they steeled themselves for the trials ahead. As Charles and Xanth stumbled deeper into the nightmarish swamp, a thick, cloying mist enveloped them. It seeped into their lungs with each labored breath, leaving a foul taste on their tongues. The mist clung to their skin like a cold, damp shroud, chilling them to the bone. Strange shapes moved in the murky water, just at the edge of their vision. Bioluminescent creatures darted through the gloom, their eerie glow casting ghostly shadows that danced and flickered, playing tricks on their exhausted minds. Each step became a struggle as the muddy ground sucked at their feet, threatening to pull them down into its treacherous depths. Suddenly a chorus of haunting, inhuman cries echoed through the mist. The sound sent icy tendrils of fear down their spines, making their hearts race with primal terror. Xanth froze, her senses heightened by the alien environment. She recognized the calls, the hunting cries of predatory swamp creatures that stalked their prey in packs. "Charles," she whispered urgently, her voice tight with fear. "We need to find shelter now. Those creatures, they'll tear us apart if they catch our scent." Charles nodded, his face grim. They scanned their surroundings, desperate for any refuge from the unseen menace. The mist swirled around them, disorienting and oppressive. But then Charles spotted a massive, twisted tree, its trunk hollowed out by age and decay. "There," he pointed, his voice low and urgent. They half stumbled, half crawled to the hollow tree, the eerie cries of the predators growing louder behind them. Charles helped Xanth climb inside the cramped space, then squeezed in after her. They huddled together, barely daring to breathe as the sounds of the creatures drew closer. Through a crack in the gnarled wood, they watched as shadowy shapes emerged from the mist. The creatures were unlike anything Charles had ever seen, their bodies a nightmarish fusion of reptile and insect, with razor-sharp claws and dripping, fang-filled maws. They prowled the swamp just outside the tree, sniffing the air, searching for their prey. In the tense, suffocating silence, Xanth began to whisper, her voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. She spoke of the true nature of the war, of the dark secrets her people had kept hidden for so long. "We didn't come to your world to conquer," she breathed, her eyes haunted. "We came to escape." Charles listened, his mind reeling as Xanth unraveled a tale of an ancient malevolent force that had driven the Jem'Hadar from their own dying planet, a force that even now pursued them across the stars, bent on their destruction. As Charles grappled with this revelation, his beliefs and the very foundations of the war he'd been fighting crumbling around him, the predators outside the tree began to claw at the bark, their hunger driving them into a frenzy. The hollow trunk shuddered under their assault, and Charles knew it was only a matter of time before their fragile sanctuary was breached. In that moment, faced with the prospect of a terrible death far from home, in a strange and hostile land, Charles and Xanth clung to each other, their differences forgotten in the face of a shared nightmare. The future was uncertain, their survival far from guaranteed, but in that cramped, dark space they found a flicker of hope in their unexpected bond. The creatures rammed the tree, their shrieks of rage and hunger filling the air. Rotten wood splintered and cracked under the onslaught. Charles and Xanth tensed, ready to face the horror together, united by the slender thread of trust and understanding they had forged in the crucible of war and survival. The trunk shuddered one final time, then gave way with a sickening crunch, exposing them to the nightmarish horde. In the split second before the creatures lunged, Charles and Xanth locked eyes, a silent promise passing between them. They would fight, they would struggle, they would cling to life and to each other, no matter what horrors the swamp or the universe had in store. Together, they braced for the onslaught, ready to face the darkness as one. As the eerie cries of the predators faded into the mist, Charles and Xanth slowly uncurled from their hiding place within the hollow tree. They emerged cautiously, scanning the swamp for any sign of the creatures. The mist swirled around them, thick and cloying, but the immediate danger seemed to have passed. Xanth nodded, straightening with a wince. She gazed up at the small patches of sky visible through the dense canopy, the stars glimmering like distant beacons. "There," she said, pointing towards a particular constellation. "If we follow that star pattern, it should lead us to a hidden Jem'Hadar research outpost deep in the swamp." Charles frowned, his brow furrowed with concern. "An outpost? Why would we go there?" Xanth met his gaze, her eyes haunted yet determined. "Because it may hold the key to ending this war, to exposing the secrets my people have kept hidden for so long, the true reason behind the conflict, the force that drove us to your world in the first place." Charles absorbed this revelation in silence, the weight of it settling heavily upon his shoulders. He had fought for so long, believing in the righteousness of his cause, but now everything had changed. He nodded slowly, his trust in Xanth overriding his doubts. "Lead the way." They set off into the swamp, Xanth navigating by the stars, Charles following close behind. Each step was a struggle, the mud sucking at their boots, the twisted roots threatening to trip them at every turn. The mist clung to their skin, cold and clammy, as if the very swamp itself sought to hold them back. As they pushed deeper into the wilderness, a strange shape loomed out of the gloom ahead. At first Charles thought it was merely another twisted tree, but as they drew closer, he realized it was something far more artificial. The wreckage of a spacecraft, its metal hull gleaming dully in the faint starlight. They approached cautiously, the murky water lapping at the ship's ruined frame. It was a human vessel, that much was clear, though its markings were unfamiliar to Charles. Xanth clambered up the side, peering into the gaping hole torn in the hull. "It's been here for a while," she called down softly. "Picked clean by scavengers, but there might still be something useful inside." Charles followed her into the wreck, the twisted corridors illuminated by the faint glow of emergency lighting. They picked their way through the debris, searching for anything that might aid in their survival. In a shattered storage locker, Charles found a handful of emergency rations, the sealed packets still intact. Xanth emerged from the cockpit with a damaged but functional communicator, hope sparking in her eyes. Just as they prepared to leave the wreck, a burst of static crackled from the communicator. A voice, faint and distorted, broke through the white noise. "Anyone out there? We need help. Crashed in the swamp. Running out of supplies." Charles and Xanth exchanged a startled glance. The voice was human, the plea unmistakable. Somewhere out there in the vast swamp, a group of survivors clung to life, desperately hoping for rescue. Charles felt a tug of duty, the ingrained urge to help his fellow humans in need. But Xanth's hand on his arm stopped him. "Charles," she whispered, her voice heavy with regret, "we can't. The outpost, the secrets it holds, they're too important. We have to stay focused on our mission." Charles closed his eyes, the weight of the decision bearing down upon him. To turn away from those in need went against everything he believed in, as a soldier, as a human being. Yet he knew Xanth was right. The fate of both their species, the truth behind the war, it all hung in the balance. With a heavy heart he nodded, his hand finding Xanth's in the darkness. Together they climbed out of the wreckage and back into the waiting swamp, the static-filled pleas of the survivors echoing in their ears. The mist swallowed them once more as they pressed on towards the hidden outpost, their bond tested and strengthened by the choices they had made. The swamp stretched out before them, vast and unknowable, filled with secrets yet to be revealed. Charles and Xanth forged ahead, guided by the stars and the flicker of hope that they might find a way to end the conflict, to bring peace to their war-torn worlds. But the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the weight of their decisions hung heavy in the stillness of the mist. The crackle of static from the salvaged communicator broke the tense silence within the wrecked spacecraft. Charles and Xanth exchanged a long, meaningful look, the weight of their unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. They both knew that abandoning the human survivors was not an option, despite the urgent need to reach the Jem'Hadar outpost and uncover the truth behind the war. With a determined nod, Charles took the communicator and began to relay their coordinates, his voice steady and reassuring. "This is Private Charles Brown of the Human Resistance. We hear you, and we're on our way. Hold tight." The response was immediate, a flood of relief and gratitude pouring through the static-filled connection. The survivors quickly provided directions to their location, a small island deep within the swamp where they had established a makeshift encampment. As Charles and Xanth set out into the mist-shrouded wilderness, they mentally prepared themselves for the challenges that lay ahead. The swamp seemed to twist and shift around them, the murky water and gnarled roots threatening to swallow them whole with each step. Hours passed, the only sounds the sloshing of their footsteps and the distant cries of alien creatures lurking in the shadows. Just as exhaustion began to take its toll, they caught a glimpse of a faint light flickering through the dense foliage ahead. Approaching cautiously, they found themselves at the edge of a small, partially submerged island, dotted with the ramshackle structures of the human encampment. But as they drew closer, they realized that the survivors were not alone. Huddled around a flickering fire, a group of Jem'Hadar soldiers sat in uneasy silence, their once proud uniforms tattered and stained with the grime of the swamp. The human survivors, wary and haggard, kept a cautious distance, their eyes never leaving their former enemies. As Charles and Xanth stepped into the firelight, the tension in the air was palpable. Hands tightened around weapons and wary glances were exchanged. But before hostilities could escalate, one of the Jem'Hadar rose to his feet, his voice low and measured. "We are not here to fight," he said, his gaze locked with Charles's. "We have seen the truth of this war, the lies and manipulation that have led us to this point. We seek only to survive and to find a way to end this conflict." Charles, his own experiences and Xanth's revelations fresh in his mind, lowered his weapon and stepped forward. "We have much to discuss," he said, his voice carrying a newfound authority. "If we are to have any hope of survival, of ending this war, we must work together." In the hours that followed, Charles and Xanth served as intermediaries between the two groups, sharing their own stories and the secrets they had uncovered. Slowly, tentatively, the barriers between human and Jem'Hadar began to crumble, replaced by a fragile understanding and a shared sense of purpose. But just as they began to piece together the larger picture of the conflict, a low, ominous hum filled the air. A Jem'Hadar reconnaissance drone, its sleek metal body glinting in the firelight, hovered at the edge of the encampment, its sensors trained on the unlikely alliance below. Panic and chaos erupted as the drone's presence sank in. The fragile trust that had begun to form shattered in an instant, replaced by a desperate scramble for survival. Charles and Xanth, caught in the middle, fought to maintain order as the group hastily gathered what supplies they could and fled into the swamp, the drone's menacing hum echoing in their wake. As they plunged deeper into the unknown, the mist swallowing them once more, the weight of their differences and the constant threat of discovery bore down upon them. The once unified group began to fracture, old animosities and fears bubbling to the surface. Charles and Xanth, their own bond tested by the strain, struggled to hold the fragile alliance together as they navigated the treacherous landscape. They knew that their survival and the fate of both their species depended on their ability to overcome their differences and confront the true enemy that lurked in the shadows. As the group huddled in their makeshift camp, tensions simmered beneath the surface. The Jem'Hadar defectors eyed the humans with suspicion, while the survivors cast wary glances at their former enemies. Whispered conversations and furtive looks betrayed the fragile nature of their alliance. Charles and Xanth, sensing the growing unease, decided to take action. They approached the leaders of both factions, their voices low and urgent. Xanth nodded, her expression grim. "We need to find a way to the research outpost. It may be our only hope of uncovering the truth behind this war and finding a way to end it." After a tense debate, the leaders reluctantly agreed to allow Charles and Xanth to scout ahead, hoping they might find a safe path through the treacherous swamp. As the pair set out, the weight of their mission hung heavy on their shoulders. They trudged through the murky water, the mist clinging to their skin like a damp shroud. The swamp seemed to close in around them, the twisted trees and tangled vines creating a claustrophobic maze that threatened to swallow them whole. As they pushed deeper into the wilderness, a strange sight caught their attention. Through the mist they glimpsed the crumbling walls of an ancient temple, its surface adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer in the diffuse light. Intrigued, Charles and Xanth approached the structure, their hearts pounding with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. The temple appeared to have been abandoned for centuries, its once grand entrance now choked with vines and debris. Carefully they picked their way through the rubble, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. As they ventured deeper into the temple, they discovered a hidden chamber, its walls lined with advanced technology that seemed to predate both human and Jem'Hadar presence on the planet. Charles ran his fingers over the smooth surface of a console, marveling at the alien script that glowed softly beneath his touch. Xanth, her eyes wide with wonder, examined a series of holographic displays that flickered to life as they approached. Suddenly a blinding light filled the chamber, and a holographic figure materialized before them. It was a being unlike any they had ever seen, its features a blend of multiple alien races, its eyes ancient and filled with sorrow. The figure began to speak, its voice echoing through the chamber like a ghostly whisper. It spoke of a cycle of manipulation and exploitation, of a shadowy third party that had orchestrated the conflict between humans and Jem'Hadar for its own gain. Charles and Xanth listened in horror as the figure laid bare the true origins of the war, a twisted web of deceit and greed that had cost countless lives on both sides. As the hologram faded, they looked at each other, their faces etched with a newfound understanding and resolve. They knew they had to get back to the group, to share what they had learned, and find a way to end the war once and for all. But as they raced through the swamp, their hearts pounding with urgency, they were met with a scene of chaos and destruction. The temporary camp was in shambles, the bodies of humans and Jem'Hadar alike strewn across the muddy ground. The air was thick with the acrid smell of plasma fire and the cries of the wounded. Charles searched desperately for Xanth, his heart gripped by a sickening fear. But she was nowhere to be found, lost in the confusion of the battle. Gritting his teeth, Charles plunged into the fray, his weapon drawn as he fought his way through the Jem'Hadar patrol that had discovered their hiding place. As the battle raged around him, Charles caught a glimpse of a strange symbol carved into a nearby tree, a clue left behind by the ancient civilization that had built the temple. With a final burst of determination, he broke free of the chaos and ran into the swamp, following the trail of symbols deeper into the mist. But as he ran, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched by an unseen presence, an ancient evil that had been awakened by their discovery in the temple. The swamp seemed to twist and writhe around him, the mist growing thicker with each passing moment. As Charles trudged deeper into the fetid swamp, the symbols carved into the gnarled trees seemed to writhe and twist before his eyes. The mist thickened, swirling around him in a sickening dance, and the air grew heavy with a sense of malevolence. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, and whispers of ancient, forgotten tongues echoed in his mind. With each step, the visions grew more vivid, more disturbing. Ghostly figures materialized in the mist, their forms twisted and grotesque, their eyes burning with an unholy hunger. They reached for him with skeletal hands, their touch icy and paralyzing. Charles fought against the rising tide of terror, his grip tightening on his weapon as he struggled to discern reality from illusion. The swamp itself seemed to come alive, the water bubbling and churning with an unnatural frenzy. Tendrils of inky blackness snaked through the murky depths, grasping at his legs, threatening to drag him under. The trees bent and swayed, their branches reaching out like grasping claws, their leaves whispering dark secrets in a language he couldn't understand. As Charles pushed onward, the visions grew more personal, more tormenting. The faces of fallen comrades, twisted in agony and accusation, leered at him from the shadows. The screams of the dying, the pleas of the innocent, all echoed in his mind, a cacophony of suffering that threatened to shatter his sanity. And through it all the Presence watched, its ancient eyes boring into his soul, its malevolent influence seeping into his thoughts, tainting his very essence. It whispered promises of power, of release from the pain and guilt that haunted him. If only he would submit, if only he would embrace the darkness. But Charles clung to the memory of Xanth, to the bond they had forged in the crucible of war. Her strength, her compassion, her unwavering belief in the possibility of peace, these were the lights that guided him through the nightmare, the anchors that kept him from succumbing to the abyss. As the swamp grew denser, the visions more intense, Charles caught a glimpse of something through the trees, a structure, alien and foreboding, rising from the heart of the morass. The Jem'Hadar research outpost, now pulsing with an eerie, sickly light, its walls writhing with the same dark energy that pervaded the swamp. With a final push, Charles broke through the tree line, his eyes widening in horror at the scene before him. Jem'Hadar soldiers, their bodies twisted and deformed, their eyes glowing with an unholy fire, patrolled the perimeter, their movements jerky and unnatural. The very air crackled with malevolent power, and the ground beneath his feet pulsed with a sickening rhythm, as if the outpost itself were a living, breathing thing. Steeling himself, Charles crept closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Somewhere inside, Xanth was being held, subjected to the tender mercies of her father and the dark entity that now controlled him. The thought of her suffering, of the secrets she might reveal under torture, spurred him onward, even as every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee this accursed place. With a deep breath, Charles readied his weapon and stepped into the nightmare, knowing that whatever awaited him inside, he would face it head-on. For Xanth, for the truth, and for the hope of a future free from the cycle of war and manipulation, he would risk everything, even his own soul. The mist swallowed him as he moved towards the outpost entrance, and the swamp fell silent, waiting with bated breath for the final act of this grim tale to unfold. Inside the research outpost, the air was thick with the stench of decay and the crackle of dark energy. The walls pulsed with a sickly organic light, and the floors were slick with a viscous, black substance that clung to Charles's boots with each step. The corridors twisted and turned at impossible angles, disorienting and maddening, as if the very structure of the building had been warped by the malevolent presence that now inhabited it. Charles crept forward, his senses on high alert, his weapon at the ready. The possessed Jem'Hadar soldiers lurked in the shadows, their movements erratic and unpredictable, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly hunger. They attacked without warning, their strength and speed far beyond anything Charles had ever encountered. He fought them off, his training and instincts guiding his hand, even as his mind reeled from the horrors he had witnessed. The soldier's flesh yielded beneath his blows, revealing not blood, but a thick black ichor that oozed and writhed with a life of its own. Their screams were not of pain but of rage and ecstasy, as if the entity that controlled them reveled in the violence and the suffering. As Charles battled his way deeper into the outpost, he caught glimpses of the experiments that had been conducted here, twisted amalgamations of technology and organic matter, pulsing with the same sickly light that emanated from the walls. Tubes and wires snaked through piles of discarded flesh, and screens flickered with incomprehensible data, hinting at the depths of the depravity that had taken place within these halls. And then, in a chamber at the heart of the outpost, he found her. Xanth, suspended in a web of pulsing tendrils, her body racked with pain as her father loomed over her, his eyes black and soulless, his voice a guttural mockery of the man he had once been. "How you thought you could defy me, daughter," he hissed, his words dripping with venom. "You thought you could betray your own kind for what? For this pathetic human? For some misguided notion of peace? No, you will serve the Master, as we all will. You will be the instrument of our ascension, and together we will bring this galaxy to its knees." Charles charged forward, his weapon blazing, his heart pounding with a desperate fury. The tendrils holding Xanth lashed out at him, their touch searing and agonizing, but he pushed through the pain, driven by the need to save her, to end this nightmare once and for all. As he fought, the chamber began to shift and warp around them. the walls melting away to reveal a vast pulsing void, filled with the writhing forms of countless abominations. And there, at the center of it all, the entity itself, a seething mass of darkness and corruption, its form constantly shifting and changing, its very presence a violation of all that was natural and sane. "You struggle in vain, human," it whispered, its voice a chorus of 1,000 tortured souls. "You cannot hope to comprehend the power, the glory that awaits those who serve me. Embrace the darkness, join your essence with mine, and together we will remake this galaxy in my image." But Charles stood firm, his love for Xanth, his belief in the possibility of a better future, shining like a beacon in the darkness. He raised his weapon, ready to make his final stand, even as the entity's power pressed down upon him, threatening to crush his very soul. And then Xanth was there, standing beside him, her hand in his, her eyes blazing with the same determination that had brought them this far. Together they faced the entity, their love and their sacrifice a testament to the indomitable spirit of life, to the power of hope in the face of even the darkest of evils. In that moment, they knew what they had to do. The research outpost, the source of the entity's power, had to be destroyed, no matter the cost. With a final, desperate effort, they fought their way to the self-destruct mechanism, their bodies battered and bleeding, their minds pushed to the very brink of madness. As they initiated the sequence, the entity screamed in rage and agony, its form unraveling, its power dissipating like smoke on the wind. Charles and Xanth clung to each other as the world around them began to disintegrate, the cataclysmic energy surge tearing through the outpost, the swamp, the very fabric of the planet itself. In their final moments, they whispered words of love and comfort, their hearts united in the face of oblivion. And as the light consumed them, as the planet was scoured clean of the evil that had plagued it for so long, their sacrifice stood as a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, to the unbreakable bonds of compassion and understanding that could transcend even the darkest of divisions. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.